when you're given a paper, it's to serve you so you don't have to be getting fingers cramps as you're madly taking notes. But I would like to ask you, urge you, plead with you to stay on the same page I am on. You'll have the paper, it's in your hand. You can read the whole thing through from beginning to end on your own time. We'll give a lot of time in this next session. But if we can stay together, I think I'll be able to add some additional information and value that will increase your understanding and help us process this. Did any of you hear me? Thank you. Who still does not have a paper? Are we all good? There are still seats scattered around the room. Unless you want to remain standing, you feel free to be seated. We'll go through this in the next 30, 35 minutes until our break time, okay? We're getting ready for a new season, we believe, of great growth, multiplication, and fruitfulness. God, in His graciousness, has been in a process of realigning us this past decade plus, and we are pursuing His presence because we believe that God's dream over us is not yet fulfilled. And we want to be so sensitive to the owner of the YWAM house that we would make sure that we are fully in sync with Him and participating with Him in the accomplishment of everything that is upon His heart. The purpose that we're looking at our YWAM values afresh today in this leadership body of some 400 people who've gathered from 65, I think it may be 66, 67 nations, but is because we need a fresh affirmation of who we are so that we can go forward with great unity, celebrating the diversity of our unique gifts and callings. We want to connect at this time our values more closely to our worldview, our purpose, our beliefs, and our principles that we function by. Over the last 20-some years, there's been teaching about the belief tree. Darlene introduced this in the early to mid-90s, and thousands have benefited from this teaching. And so we're trying to put on, let me just explain the whole document and I'll walk through it. There's a one-page overview that we think if we can try to get on a one-page, graphic, simple, all-inclusive statement of everything that is essential to know about our identity, okay? The next 2 pages, if you want to open that up, are our YWAM values. They're all 18 values. You'll notice they're in a bit different order. So if you look in the lines, it'll have in parentheses the order that we've been familiar with. But instead of numbering them by order, we've put in this 2-word title that we try to describe the essence. Each title has an adjective and a noun. It's something we value, okay? We'll get to that in just a moment. And then the last 2 pages of this document, one is a one-page overview of the belief tree teaching. So there are other things that have been written that they're referenced in a footnote there that you can locate at ywam.org about the belief tree teaching, longer statements, 4 or 5 pages long. But this seems to be a one-page synthesis of that so that you can easily pass that on. We're trying to make things facilitate things so they can be multicultural, multi-generational, and we can pass things on. The last page has 5 major subtitles, and they unpack in a paragraph or 2 the main points about this first page, okay? So I'm going to try to walk through all of that, and then we'll have time to discuss it and reflect on it and make amendments, adjustments to it as whatever befits our family going forward in obedience to the call of God upon our lives. Many of you have seen this poster of the belief tree. Joseph Avakian do this particular one, and I've seen it on big posters in the front hallways of YWAM bases in different parts of the world. And it's just a reminder that this is a paradigm of how we grow in both personal discipleship and in corporate leadership. We want to walk through that. There are several elements there. The soil represents the worldview. The worldview has to do with that which is real. That is usually things that we assume about the nature of God, man, and the cosmos, even before we begin a cognitive process. We pick that up from our families, from our culture, from the environment we live in. Like the soil is not part of the tree, but it is the environment around the tree from which the tree takes life and nourishment. The roots of the tree are like our belief system. And our belief system always goes back to who God is. It is not coincidental. It is not an aberration. It's not a diversion that we are focusing so much on the presence of God. Who He is, what He says, what He does. This is the foundation of everything. This is not a new thought. This has been what we have sought to live by these last 54 years as a mission. But God is taking us deeper into that, to know Him more profoundly, and to intentionally connect everything to Him. If something that we do or believe or value is not connected to who He is, what He said, what He's done, then let us rid ourselves of that. And let's align ourselves with Him. That's what we're talking about at beliefs. Values are that's the trunk of the tree. It's what we consider as good, desirable, pleasant, beautiful, attractive. Values become our default position. When you just go back to that. If you read one of the values and it seems like a law or requirement or a standard external to your heart that you have to live up to, friend, it is not a value for you. A value is the internal celebration of the desired way to live. Okay? And so when we love this, not when we do hospitality because value number whatever says YWAMers are supposed to be hospitable, but I'm really sick and tired of all these short-term teams coming through, but darn it, I'm a YWAMer, I guess I'll have to be hospitable anyway. We're not evidencing hospitality as a value. It's an obligation, it's a legalism, it's something not life-giving when it's supposed to be the reflection of our life. Values are good. I love hospitality. Beneficiary of hospitality in nearly 500 YWAM bases around the world. My wife, over the last 12 years that we've been in Kona, she serves an average of 1,700 meals to non-family members every year. We love hospitality. We love having people come into our house. We'd get hear stories. Yeah, I count. That was not a made-up number. I count. So just in case you were wondering, did I just pull that out of the air? No. Every day, how many guests did we have today? Okay, it goes on the list, yep. But it's just such a joy to have others influence our family. Our kids growing up, 1 week, they'd have a conversation with someone from Afghanistan, then someone from the Caribbean, then someone working in a Muslim country in North Africa, and then someone working, and they're just like, they grew up loving the nations because of you. You came and stayed in our home. You had a meal with us. Principles are then what we do is right, what we consider right. These are the branches of the tree. Corporately, sometimes you call them policies. But these are the things that help us make decisions, to discern the appropriate course of action. And then, of course, our actions are that which is wise. Now, friends, these are not hard, fast terms. There's not a hard, fast, if you try to define the difference between what's true and good, and when does true end and when does good start, You're not looking at a tree. A tree is, the roots blend into the trunk, and the trunk blends into the branches. And there's not a millimeter where it's all this, and then the next millimeter it's all that. So these are not hard and sharp definitions, but we know that if these things are not in sync, in harmony, if by the Holy Spirit, which you could see as the sap of the tree, is uniting these things, then there is a disconnect, or sometimes a syncretism. That means like the two things that don't mix well together. So if you grew up in an animistic culture, you believe all sickness is caused by a spirit of some kind. And maybe someone brought down a curse or blessing on you. But you come to Jesus and you believe Jesus heals. So when you get sick, you pray. Because that's true. And so you get sick, you pray, and you don't get healed. So what do? You go down to the witch doctor, offer a chicken, and he breaks the curse, and you get well, because that's real. That happens. And it's easy to see that in somebody else's culture. It's harder to see it in our own. But we all have mixtures, don't we? We all hold things that are not in harmony. And maturity, personally and corporately, is as these things become more and more in sync. And eventually the goal is integrity, which means one. These are all line up as one continuous life flow, as the sap of the Spirit is connecting, taking from the soil, going through the roots, into the trunk, through the branches, and giving fruit, which will give nourishment to the nations. And when all of that is together, when what is real and what is true and what is good and what is right in our lives, then the resulting actions will be wise. And that's what we're looking for. Okay, so we do belief tree teachings, and sometimes in 2 weeks long, but that was about a 10-minute version of it. And it allows you to ask really important leadership questions. If you ask the why question, that's the presuppositional or foundational question, like, why do we do this action? It should lead you to a principle. Or why do we have this principle? It should lead you to a value. Why do we have this value? It should lead you to a belief. Something rooted in the nature and character of God. Why? And this helps develop our critical thinking as leaders so that we understand our roots. We can also go not only ask questions from the fruit to the root, but we can ask questions from the root to the fruit. And those are the applicational or implicational questions that are led by so what? We believe this is true, so what? Well, we have this value. Well, so what? It leads us to this principle. Well, so what? It leads us to this kind of action. How should we then live? So our identity is important because it clarifies our decision making so that we can honor God in all of our ways. Now that's kind of like the covering of that next to the last page of what the belief tree is all about. And let me just say one more thing about that, about the belief tree, and it's this. Let me go back here just a page. Sometimes in our process of realignment, when we discover that something's out of sync, that something might be a thought. It might be a belief, some statement that we've held that is untrue, and we need to change our thinking. Sometimes the thing that is out of alignment has to do with the affective area, our emotions, our feeling, our heart, our values. We're finding goodness in the wrong things, and we start there. It doesn't begin with the changing of a thought, but the changing of an affection. Sometimes we find our alignment when we look at a particular action and we go, oh, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that. Why are we doing it that way? That's not in keeping with the scriptures. And so that shows that we have this action wrong. So sometimes the problem is with our head. Sometimes it's with our hearts. Sometimes it's with our hands. But as we learn to ask the questions and seek to be integrated, holistic, healed mature, then all of those things, you can begin with the wrong action and not just change the action, but with the right questions, see God transform the whole tree. You can start with the wrong affection, where God speaks to you that you've placed a love in something more than in himself. It's called idolatry. And you go, oh, change this. I've got to think of goodness in a different way. And you can begin there at a heart issue. And then it works downward, changing your mind, and upward, changing your actions. And the whole tree can be transformed. So this is not a piecemeal adjustment. But like the metaphor that Damien just used, we want Jesus to own the whole house. We're not renting it. We're not renting part of it. We're saying you own the whole thing. And we want his spirit and his sap to go through and make sure that all of these parts are connected. Friends, ideas have consequences. Affections have consequences. Actions have consequences. We need to habituate ourselves in doing good and loving well and thinking truly. Okay. So let's look at this first page. You can see I've highlighted a green area, so we're just going to focus on that top area. And what we've done here is we've included something that we've never had in one of our documents. It's always been there. We've taught it. In fact, the very first school of evangelism, Francis Schaeffer came and taught these principles that a worldview that is both biblical and Christian is built on 4 presuppositions. You could add more elements, but these are the basic, minimal 4. These are the things that are behind every verse of Scripture. Every passage in the Word assumes this, that God is both infinite and personal, that human beings are both finite and personal. He's infinite, we're finite. We're not like God. He's personal, we're personal. He's made us in his image. So there are things that are unlike him, there are things that are like him because of his doing, because of his design. Third, that truth is constant and knowable. Okay, I should be showing this here. Truth is constant and knowable. That's a much richer phrase than truth is absolute. Okay? True truth is constant and knowable. And some aspects of truth are absolute and some aspects of truth are relative depending on the circumstance. But the truth itself is constant. The truth who is a person is constant. And we don't have to be guessing. We don't have to live in doubt. We don't have to live in an agnostic insecurity. We can know him. It is true that it is impossible for the finite to get to know the infinite. This was the statement of John Stuart Mills, an agnostic philosopher of the last century. It is true. On our own, we couldn't do this. We couldn't know him. It'd be like if we were from Singapore, went down to the beach and tried to swim to Hawaii. I would drown in the first 200 meters. Some of you would maybe survive 5 kilometers, but eventually everyone would drown because the challenge exceeds our capacity. So John Stuart Mills was correct, except for he forgot something very important. The truth became flesh and dwelt among us. The infinite became finite. In Christ Jesus, God became man, and in this man, God, the fullness of the Godhead dwelt. And the infinite God in finite form that we might touch him and see him, as it says in 1 Peter 1. So I just did John, Colossians, 1 Peter. And friends, he is knowable because he has made himself known. And we have the privilege of using the reason he's given us based on the revelation that he has graciously displayed among us. Finally, that human beings are responsible and our choices have consequences. So we want to just have that before us in an age where it's becoming increasingly difficult to know what is distinctive about Christianity. These four simple truths are really crucial. The next statement that we see on the paper is our purpose statement.